Good morning, everyone. This is the Kubernetes 1.8 release burndown meeting. I'm not going to dare say it's the last one because that's the surest way to ensure it's not the last one. It's Thursday, September 28th, 2017. I am your host, Jace Singer-DeMars, and this meeting will be available after the fact. The notes will be available after the fact, rather, at bit.ly/Gates18 release. So getting started, essentially our job today is to determine what is different from yesterday. So diff today, space yesterday. We're going to start with blocking test list and just checking in to see if anything has changed in terms of tests, because I believe maybe some small things have. Aaron.
Yeah, I'm still in the midst of updating my wonderful spreadsheet. I'll have a more complete picture to give closer to the end of this meeting. As far as the release 1.8 tests, last I looked, there are 3 jobs that don't have 3 passes in a row right now. And 3 of the kubectl skew tests don't have 3 passes in a row. I think that the larger consequence that's worth discussing is if we accept a revert commit, or basically if we accept any change today to the code, if we still wish to wait until we have 3 passes in a row of all of the tests marked strong, that have a strong signal that seem to run relatively quickly, that still means we end up waiting anywhere from 3 to 4 hours to get that. And most of the upgrade tests take a long enough time that we effectively won't have signal on the upgrade tests, because a lot of them take anywhere from 7 to 12 hours. If we desire to cut a release today, that's sort of what the ballpark numbers look like. We'll have to see how we feel about all that. That's why I'm trying to push for us to get as many test results as early as possible to see if this adjusts the correctness of any of the tests. I personally believe that the upgrade tests have more or less shaken out what they're going to find. I think that the particular change we're examining, if it changed anything, it would reveal itself relatively quickly in that 3-hour period. And based on what we have this morning, excluding some of those jobs that don't quite have all their ducks in a row, I would be comfortable cutting with the code we have right now. And this includes the sort of last minute diving save that DIMS and Liggett and folks chased for the that release blocker bug around unqualified Docker Hub image names on Project Atomic-based platforms. That's all I have. Eric, do you want to add any more color to that?
I just generally agree. I don't think that we're discovering necessarily anything new over the last 24 hours, and any of the tests that are not passing either have not run 3 times, have had 3 passes in the last 24 hours at some point, so it's hard to say that any of those would have this strong signal that any of those are related to any of the code changes that have come.
So here's my take on it. If for some reason this revert goes in and we start seeing some weird anything, like things seem different or broken in any way, we will revert the revert and put this out with a known issue. So waiting for multiple days to get this fully tested with the three-ring, the Wagner 3-ring cycle is probably not an option at this point. The use cases around seeing this delete action trigger latency in clusters is a relatively limited use case, so we would just focus all of our attention at that point on trying to come up with a fix and get that into 1.8.1 and also for 1.9. So unless there's a significant disagreement on that, I think that's how we should proceed.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I was just trying to ballpark the 3 to 4 hours because I think that gets us that's still pretty much on schedule if we plan on doing a dry run of cutting a build at 1 p.m. Pacific, about 3 hours away from now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, we need to do our due diligence, and that the revert is getting a lot of attention right now from SIGNode. So that makes me feel good that people are actually looking at the code and it's getting priority. So yeah, fingers crossed that the testing just comes back and validates what we already know. And oh boy. Literally just that second, as those words came out of my mouth, Clayton just put on, hold on, is this dangerous? Oh, okay. Can't make this stuff up, folks. So, well, we'll let that sort out here. I'd rather have people raise concerns with it and go that route than to put something that's dangerous. So we'll figure that out.
And to be honest as well, like we have isolated the cause well enough that we know this doesn't apply to deletes in general. It doesn't even apply to rapid deletes. It applies to rapid deletes from a bunch of nodes at the same time that are batched in this way. And if we're talking about like responsiveness, practically, these are coming at the end of waiting for 30 seconds for your pod to be cleaned up anyway. I know we don't want to ship with any known issues, but the severity of this known issue seems acceptable if there are questions about the safety of it. So,
yeah, that seems in alignment with everything I've seen so far. And you know, there's always known issues. I mean, there's a few in there. So I mean, yeah, if you wait till there's absolutely no issues, then we might as well just put this out at the time we put out 1.9. let's shoot for a Christmas ship date on this.
I haven't been following the issue in detail, but it seems eminently documentable for what it's worth, which is a plus, since we need to look at the plus side.
Yeah, would it be worth staging the documentation for the known issue on this?
I mean, I thought we had it staged yesterday when we thought we were going out with this as a known issue.
Is the only latency issue that we've got in known issues, I just checked because I thought, okay, am I scrambling things? I thought we documented a latency issue about audit logging. Let me check. Audit logs might impact the API server performance and the latency of large request and response calls.
Yeah, that was that particular issue. Once it was resolved, exposed this other issue. So
yeah.
They're
so,
both related.
Yep, that's what I thought. And we don't have this one explicitly documented. So if once someone can help me do that right after this meeting, I'll get it in. Everything else is pushed. Y'all can take a look now. And if anybody has suggestions for how to present the two of these together, that would also be helpful.
Yeah, I'm pasting into the chat now one of the items in the known issues accumulator there, called out API delete pod API calls increased latency at high scale.
Yep, I was starting to look at that one right before this meeting. Didn't have a chance to parse the whole thing, so
yep.
I'm on the same page. Then we're good.
Cool. As long as you have what you need, and it sounds like Jordan would be a good person to ask questions if you run into a.
Yeah, if I've got any questions, I mean, I can do one of two things. I can just push another PR, or I can ping you with a snippet, Jordan, whichever you prefer.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So we sort of went into the known issues thing. I don't think anything has changed in Kube ADM status. Let me take a look at that real quick. Nope. Okay, so as it stands now, just to recap where we're at, we're going to worst case known issue the pod deletion regression. and target fix for patch releases for 1.8 and for the regular release of 1.9. And we're going to give as much testing signal as we can to the fix as it stands now. Ideally, that will ship, and we'll feel confident enough that that fixes the regression, and we won't have to include the known issue in the release notes. Any disagreement as far as where we're at right there?
Can I just clarify? I thought there were two different things. We're proposing that we are going to accept this fix on the assumption that it actually fixes things, and we'll try and launch with that fix today.
Our preferred stratagem is to ship with the revert in place, or the partial revert, and have that issue not be in the release. If there is contention around that revert, or testing signal gets bungled somehow, we will ship with the code as it is right now in the release branch with a known issue in the release notes.
And we're just going to write up the known issue now so that we're ready to go in either.
To be ready in case, yes. Does that sound good, Adam?
Sounds a bit tight, but it doesn't sound impossible. I mean, yeah.
The tight part being the testing around the fix that's going in right now.
No, I actually have some faith in that. It's more that we'll then receive the patch at some point, I guess, in the next half hour. We'll get it committed at some point after that, if we decide to go ahead with this course of action. So we'll actually have final release 1.8 branch around about 11:30. And then we've got, I'm assuming that this is a minor change and we don't expect it to care too much about the other test results aside from the performance. But we won't have a very big window to gather any test results on what we propose as the final set of binaries.
That is tight, and that is correct. The idea is simply that we're truly working on a diff-based process here, that the scope of the change doesn't necessarily invalidate prior test runs. So we're using a bit of fuzzy-wuzzy human logic around this, which may or may not be the best thing to do, but I think it is a safe. If this was my organization and we were putting out a release, I as a organizational leader, I would be fine with that logic.
Yeah. I may also, if we're going to change the code and invalidate where it's at, I would be tempted to include two other cherry picks. I don't know if that, we can talk about that offline if that's a wise thing to do.
Are you dying, Jordan?
A little bit, yeah.
Dying on the inside?
Was that my out loud voice?
Yeah.
If it's going to cause people's heart rates to escalate, then we can skip them. They just make, they're proposed to deflate tests, and they affect the test. They're connected to the test.
I mean,
and I've been holding off on them on the basis that we don't really need them, but I can carry on holding off on them.
I know Shyam's really been putting in a lot of folks have been putting in a lot of effort to fix this particular regression. We didn't have any of the key stakeholders available at the 6 scale meeting this morning to really make a final call as to whether or not we absolutely have to block based on this. But like I said yesterday, I'm feeling like this is well scoped enough and we have enough signal on the release as it is this morning. We could proceed as is and document this performance regression as a known issue. If we think it seemed like we might have a fix and it might work. And we're just trying to, how much time is too much time to wait to see if this works? Because I recognize we're not going to get the best tests.
I mean, we're running the performance test now. That's running now with this fix.
What I was trying to say earlier is I was under the impression that pre-submits will likely catch a lot of the correctness issues. Mm-hmm. And we'll have feedback from the performance tests. And so more or less, if we adhere to the original schedule where I think, Adam, you were going to do a dry run at 1 p.m. Pacific, we'll know whether or not we're comfortable with that by 1 p.m. Pacific. And if we're not, we can immediately revert back to where we are right now. and we are comfortable with where we're at right now.
Okay.
But I'm super happy being super conservative and playing it safe. I'm just trying to, I acknowledge a lot of hard work has been put in here, and if we think it's worth it, it's worth it. Clayton, I noticed you've joined and you're muted and you're having a discussion on the particular revert. I don't know if you have some additional insight to add here.
I don't want to say that the revert is wrong, but I don't consider 5,000 node tests more important than the general health and correctness of Kubernetes. And so just stepping back, looking at the issue, which is we have a regression caused by a thundering herd problem in one particular case on a very large cluster. I would ship the living daylights out of that every day with an issue note that says, hey, we found a late breaking performance issue. We're going to go fix it the right way. Everybody else, we're totally happy with being the safe cluster. So I want to get Dawn's opinion on the issue, but that's just, my bias is I care about 5,000 nodes. Everybody who has 5,000 nodes is not upgrading to Cube 1.8 3 seconds after it's updated. And if they are, they're going to have to go test their workload anyway under it. They can wait a little bit longer. So that's kind of where I balance that.
I don't think this latency issue has any practical impact, even on a 5,000 node cluster. I mean, this is happening when you are deleting all of your pods, and instead of them taking a minute and a half to go away, they take a minute and 45 seconds to go away. That for tearing down a massive cluster, I don't think that's a practical impact. I think it is that we don't want to ship with a known issue that breaks our SLO. That's what we're working hard towards, which is good. But if we can get a quick answer on what the implication of the fix is, I don't, from what I'm hearing on the pull request, it doesn't sound like it raises any concerns about volume detaching. It sounds like it might mean the scheduler has an inaccurate view of the node for up to 30 seconds, which has been the case in previous releases. We can take it on the pull request, but I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, and as far as the definition and clarity of those SLOs, right? This is something that SIG scalability knows that we took a rough pass at 99% of API calls must return within 1 second, and except for list calls, and it must have no low latency calls under 5 seconds, I think it was. But we recognize that's too rough a definition. Unfortunately, all the people who were involved in drafting up sort of our new SLIs and SLOs are out and on vacation. But I feel relatively comfortable speaking on their behalf, and Clayton, you're a regular participant in SIG-Scale as well, that we wouldn't have a lot of heartache if we shipped with this particular delete API. Latency regression as a known issue.
Right, and I would actually say that we might be worrying about the wrong thing, which is we're talking about reverting something that makes it a little bit more, that makes the system a little bit more quote unquote correct. The actual problem right now is that when the system is a little bit less correct, everything behaves fine. And I would say the problem is that we're hammering the master, just to get in the details, it's we're hammering the masters in a very specific case. Still valid. Why don't we fix the hammering the master problem, not the everything lining up is, there's just I'm a little skeptical that we're fixing the right thing with this revert.
I have that feeling too, and this is something I've been kind of going back and forth on, is that if the main regression is that we're violating an SLO, sometimes SLOs become invalidated by a change in the architectural underpinnings of the way calls are made for correctness sake. I mean, you can do great things with disk writes if you just ignore fsyncs, right? I mean, you can do really dumb things to make things faster, and that doesn't make it right. So I want to make sure that we're not. I want to make sure that we're not undoing something that is going to help with the sanctity of synchronizing actions in favor of trying to support an SLO that may not even be realistic.
I walked in here really wanting to give this revert PR a chance, but I'm feeling talked down from that cliff and more willing to ship what we have today.
So I think the right thing to do is to let the revert proceed, get data from it, because ultimately, what at the end of the day, the thing that would have to be done at that point is just to simply revert it in the branch, and then we're back to the version that's already tested. I don't think that would warrant a full retest. But if that's not the case, if it is going to trigger more churn in the release branch, then maybe this isn't the right thing to do.
Okay, let's go back over timing. Adam, assuming we were to cut right now with what we have, Adam, when would you press the button? When is the last possible chance we could actually revert the reverts?
You're muted, Adam.
2 o'clock. 2 p.m. The whole build and push thing takes, I don't want to assume it takes anything less than 3.5 hours. And if we're aiming for 6, then 2 o'clock could be when we could do some manual git hackery, throw away the commit, and then proceed.
Adam, I'm intoning from your body language and general demeanor that maybe you're not a fan of the revert.
Oh, no, sorry. No, don't read anything into that. I'm fine with that. I think it's. I was trying to track a little bit around the whole is a revert adversely affecting the correctness of the system debate, which is a little above my understanding of the system. But I think it's not a clear thing. So I consider this is kind of maybe a muddy issue. But yeah, no, I'm fine. If you want to revert the revert, we can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's where I'm kind of leaning on Eric as well. I think we are the two humans who have the most of the way the tests behave paged into our brains, and I feel relatively comfortable if I saw the way the pre-submits passed against this, which that's necessary to get the PR merged in the first place, and the larger post-submit coverage. I prefer to wait 3 hours to see 3 of those happen in a row, but even one of those would give me more confidence, right? But this is sort of, it just, like Clayton said, taking a step back, it feels like I'm playing release chicken here.
Yeah, and if I was an administrator and you told me that on a 5,000 node cluster, when I delete, how many thousand pods is this, Jordan?
Maybe 5,000, something like that.
I'm deleting 5,000 pods in 1 second. I would
in 1 minute across 5,000 nodes.
Yeah, if you said I have an SLO that requires this, I would say I absolutely believe that you can have an SLO to require this. Can you wait till 181 to get that SLO fixed? Absolutely. Do we have any? So my second question would be, okay, well, so 5,000 nodes are a problem. Do we have any evidence this is a problem at a 1,000 node or 500 node?
It was recreated on a 2,000 node cluster.
I mean, it feels like, does anybody
basically, we have rate limiting in place so that one node isn't going to go rogue. But if you saturate requests from a lot of nodes at the same time, which is what this caused, then they can basically deletion across a bunch of nodes of a lot of things got batched. And
so maybe what we should say is if you have a cluster above 100 nodes and very, very rapid deletion matters to you, you should wait till 181. Could we live with that? I mean, I don't know how many people go to 180 on clusters these sizes. Man.
I mean, an SLO on effective immediate deletion seems really odd to me, given that there's a 30-second delay built in there while the kubelets are tearing things down and tearing volumes down and waiting for processes to terminate. That just doesn't seem like a thing that people are going to care about.
Yeah, and that's where I would be comfortable saying that SIG scale will be willing to revisit how tightly we define that SLO as part of 1.9.
And I'd say the SIG, like we should probably, like my gut would be, it's better to be correct at the end of a release than it is to worry about a few performance regressions that we believe we can fix or address in a point release. I would worry about reverting a correctness, and I'm using correctness slightly, it's not the end of the world if this gets reverted. But what I would rather say, if you have a performance issue, wait for this because we want to figure out a good solution for it, versus we reverted a correctness fix and we don't know when we're going to bring it back.
And honestly, what the ultimate fix for this, assuming we do want to wait until containers are cleaned up to delete, which we probably do, what we would end up doing is rate limiting the deletes. And so your effective time to the pod API object being deleted is not going to magically go down. We're just going to spread the API calls so that the latency is not in the API calls. The latency will be in the time the kubelet takes to make the call. So if your SLO is, I want to delete this, and exactly 30 seconds later it must be out of the API, you're going to be disappointed because it takes time to clean things up. It seems like we're artificially trying to meet an API latency and not seeing the big picture of, latency to clean up a pod is, 30 seconds, given container cleanup.
Maybe we should get Don and a few other people from SIG Scale and discuss the SLO real quick and say, do we think this SLO is legitimate to get the parameters and see if we can suss out what the actual customer impact or end user impact would be of the SLO changing or being breached in this case?
I'm trying to reach out to Sham, and I see Marek is online, but Wojtek and Bob, I think, were most involved in crafting the SLO and SLI docs, and they're both on vacation at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, latency is a hammer. This feels a little bit more like a scalpel kind of thing. Like if the core use case is, I want to be able to roll all the pods in my cluster in 30 seconds, that is a reasonable goal. That doesn't necessarily tie to the latency here. And the fix is, you just can't delete things faster. You can delete unless you lie about how fast you're cleaning stuff up. And so the flexibility here that might be is hey, I want to, trading a little bit of speed, trading a little bit of correctness for a little bit of speed causes me physical pain at a release boundary.
Yeah, I have to say, Clayton, I'm listening to the arguments on both sides. I'm in 100% agreement to you. I think that we're dealing with an arbitrary limit versus an actual real world limit. And I feel like those are at loggerhead right now. And I'd rather err toward the side of correctness.
And on the release note, we can certainly, on an issue note, if we said the SLO is this, here's the actual practical impact of what this means from a user perspective on turning over a cluster very quickly. If you have one of these clusters and if you have a 5,000 node cluster that's running production workloads and you don't read the release notes of a 0.0 release, I have no sympathy for you.
Although what I was going to say is the other thing that we can do if people are concerned about not knowing enough about real world customer usage is we can point to this issue, call it out. We link to the release notes from the docs. There are a few other places where we can call it out if people think it warrants it.
And Dawn just commented on the pull request as well, and she doesn't consider it a release blocker or a actual regression. So,
well, right now I don't actually see anybody arguing that we should. I mean, there's nobody actually saying, "Hey, this has to be a release blocker" at this point. I mean, we're all.
Hey, Don made a really good point, which would be waiting for volume deletion had a bigger impact, and we were totally okay with introducing that before. Volume was an actual we were deleting too fast, and real data was corrupted. And this is a smaller impact of that, and we were okay. I mean, that's a good bit of data.
That impacted overall latency latency the time a pod deletion timestamp was set to the time it was removed, but it didn't actually cause the thundering herd. So that you still had a spread with the volume deletion.
Yeah,
I have pounded all the ground I can to find scalability people who would care about this deeply, and I'm not getting anything back.
So I consider, and this may be not the right thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I consider Signode a stronger stakeholder in this matter than I do SigScale. Because they're a little bit closer to the problem.
So I have one question. Do we actually taking a risk of accepting this change in the sorted revert and in 3 hours decide if it's good to go or not? I mean, we tried a lot to make all of these tests green, and some of them are not decided in 3 hours. I think we are fixing something that is not very important for us, and we are adding some unknown to the release, unknown factors to the release.
Yeah, Mehdi,
I think if we are not ready to postpone the release on another day for this revert, we should not do the revert. That's my thinking.
Yeah, I think, Mehdi, that's becoming the prevailing thought right now, is that we should just full stop on messing with that revert and say that that's very valid. That would have been valid like 2 or 3 days ago, where we could get some solid signal around it and some assurances about what the impact on the day-to-day use cases are. But right now, I think that Clayton's assertion that correctness trumps the scale issues here, I think, is exactly right.
I don't think we can. We will always ship with some known issues. Using this as a test to make sure that we're reaching our core audience for the people impacted by this known issue is a good test for the release process, which is, are we clearly communicating to all consumers of Kubernetes that you are a user in this class X and you are impacted by Y, and we have effective processes for doing that, is really, really important, because the stakes are only going up from here. Yeah,
agreed. And this, like you said, this sort of thing is going to happen in the future, and this is a high watermark for how we handle it. So, barring objections, what I would like to propose to the assembled people here is, let's abandon work on trying to get that the revert merged. Let's write up the best possible known issue we can, which means that all the people who've had opinions here, I'd love, Clayton, for you to pair with Jennifer and Jordan to write a very definitive look into what this means. And also, perhaps, I think this is something we can set as a precedent, is that in the known issue, I think it would bear explaining this decision process that we went through to get to that point. Not in great detail, but at least to explain that we weighed the pros and cons of it.
May have Merrick showing up to talk about this.
Yep, I am here. I just don't know what's the state right now.
So to quickly summarize, we were saying the the measurement the measurement is a little bit arbitrary in this case. What we were asking the question, if we step back to what the actual user impact is, the SLA or the measurement is intended to capture, can I turn over a very large cluster very rapidly without extreme delay? Whether the API request latency is 3 seconds or 3 milliseconds, the effective time to turn over all the pods is still roughly 20 to 30 seconds. The question is by being a little bit less correct on the node, are we serving the end user and administrator better, who has this, like, if I'm turning over 5,000 pods all at once on a very large cluster, do I want to be absolutely sure that the nodes are going to work correctly when I turn those pods over? Or do I care how quickly the individual API calls return on the nodes? And we were kind of arguing a little bit that the actual...
I think that's the wrong discussion. Feature-wise, you're right. Like the thing is, like, we had this test running like all the time. No one complained it before about like how we measured it before. It is failing. We know why it is failing. And like just before the release, we are just going to say that like we don't like.
So what is it measuring? How does this impact an admin and a user?
Well, it doesn't matter. Like the test, like, well, yes, in future, but like not just before the release.
So we made a correctness fix and performance went down. Is that, what's more important, correctness or performance?
Well, like, depends on how it's all tied in. Like, the thing is, like, we kind of agreed on set of tests that we are running, right? Like, before the release, which should be passing.
Sure, but we also agreed that the product should be correct, right? So it's like, there's no absolute on the.
We don't know how it will impact all the other stuff as well. We never measured it, right? Like, we know that this causes some tests to fail. Like, generally, it's like that's the typical like approach. Like, if something causes test to fail, first revert, then think about like what should be done about it. And like, if we are not doing that, like if we are doing exceptions because like we think it's a better idea, then we will have like more and more exceptions like that.
I don't think that's true. I think it will be a priority to adjust the behavior so that we maintain the correctness and get back within our desired targets.
No, it's still not like, we have tests that something broke, right? Like, it is not the time a day before the release to say that the test was wrong.
Well, the test is wrong.
Well, a bit.
The test is not wrong. It's arbitrary. It's a target. It's a performance target.
Yes.
And so if we meet that at the expense of correctness, that's a bad trade-off.
It is a documented target, like which we promised to meet.
Right, and that's why we're talking about documenting a known issue that in this narrow scenario, we have not met our documented target, and anyone who depends on that target should wait for us to resolve this scenario and get it back within the target. And I expect that to happen.
We should
quickly.
do this another way around. If we, like, this is idea SLO that we are all agreed to adhere, and we just can't break it because like reasons. Like, if it would be a serious thing, then sure. But we were like running like this for like last whatever.
We were also running with the fix, the correctness fix on the node that correctly reports the status of the node to the API server and the scheduler for as long as we've had this in. So it's like, I agree. Like, I agree with the principle that if we change, if we say like, well, we can ship without this, but I would never ship a release that was incorrect. Unless I could, I mean, like, there's no absolutes in any of this. Like, I can make the argument that we had a bug, we fixed it, and now we're going to revert a bug fix because we were wrong.
Well, yes, but like we also like the main main procedures for pretty much like all the testing that I know of, like, is basically like if you have a set of tests that are passing and something breaks the test, first revert, then think. Like, while we are not.
The tests have never been passing, Merrick. I mean, if you look at the release master blocking dashboard and then the GCE scale performance tests, right? The density test has always been red going back to like the middle of August. So prior to code freeze, during code freeze, after code freeze, the test has always been red.
Yeah, because like we were like hunting for these regressions. Now we found it. Like, it takes time because like we don't have a blocking, like post-blocking suit. We would have found it way earlier if the submit queue were blocked, but like it's not longer the case. Like, it will, like, this kind of situation is like we are in this situation only because we don't have post-blocking.
Also, actually, Merrick, can I say this another way? We have three choices: revert a correctness fix, ship with a broken metric, or delay the release. And I would say that shipping incorrect code in this case, like Dawn didn't have a strong one, but she preferred it to be correct rather than buggy. And looking at this, like, if I drain 500 pods off of a node, and that node still has 500 dead containers, and then schedule 500 pods, we are going to violate metrics on that. We're not measuring that metric.
But that's not a regression. Like this, it was this way.
It's a regression.
Like, what do you mean this is regression? Like, it was this way, like, since forever.
Well, so here's my concern is that sometimes even with the best of intentions, tests can be validating an invalid assumption. So there's lots of things that you can institute in a code that would cause a passing test that for whatever purpose, data integrity or whatever that is, that the passing test is actually should be a fail because it's testing the wrong assumption. So what I want to make sure is that we're not putting out an assumption that is basically based on or predicated on the wrong underlying data. So, I mean, this is the thing. It has to be testing a valid use case.
It's like, from what I understand, like, it is testing exactly the same thing since 1.0.
But that doesn't mean that it's right. Because, well, for example, if
now
you...
we're changing, like now we want to change the behavior and make the test fail.
Well, so Merrick, maybe like I think as a point of principle, I would agree with you that changing the definition of an SLO at release time is dangerous. So the question would be, you really want to delay the release? Because I would like, and my bias is my choices I think are correct or delayed release, and your point is delayed release or incorrect or correct. Can we get some like? When we talk about delaying the release, who does that impact? Is anybody going to be significantly impacted? What is the fix we're going to put in place? There's an arbitrary amount of time to get to a fix. My problem is like, even though even though I would not go to the wall for this particular fix in terms of like, you know, everything that we said, if it is incorrect to say that a node is less busy and less burdened than it actually is. We've been testing that assumption that it's a move in the right direction. If we take that step back, we're invalidating all of the testing we've done on the correctness of nodes in other scenarios. And so it sounds like if we can't find a small fix, we're just going to delay the release indefinitely.
What? Tell me, does something change since 1.6 in this area?
Yes.
Or except
so
in terms of what the test is measuring. Is it measuring always the same thing, and we had always the same problem?
We had a very, very serious correctness bug that was fixed in 1.6, which was we deleted pods before nodes were detached, which led to horrible bad behavior. So we fixed that. When we did that, we increased the amount of time, and Jordan, correct me if I'm misstating here, we increased the amount of time it took to actually delete a pod, which is correct. Right. So if we had been measuring the SLO of all pods are deleted within 3 seconds of when the user requests it and the process terminates, we would have crossed that SLO the moment we made the correctness change for volumes. We weren't measuring that. With this set of changes in this release, it so happens that we're lining up, it looks like on locking. Jordan, correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like we're lining up on locking under the garbage collection.
It batches up after GC on the node, container GC.
We do a GC and we do a ton of deletes, which basically means we are thundering herd. We are basically lining up on the node side everything we're doing to attack the masters. Agree that's a latency violation. The system behaving correctly in that case is important as well.
Sorry, I was just joining so late. I just only heard the last part of the Clayton say. I agree with Clayton, and I think so. One thing it is we introduced the deletion part, waiting for the volume deletion down and then delete the pod in previous release, couple release before. So that one actually has the even bigger impact. The only reason I was kind of really concerned production issue at that time. The reason we have to do that is just because in today we don't have the more granularity of the pod state. So we could, so we have to, because if you don't properly reclaim all the resources held by the containers within a pod, so you didn't release those.
Okay, that's not what this test is measuring. This has absolutely no impact on the what test is measuring. Like the test is measuring how long it takes from like the single API call on the API server side. So like whatever happens with kubelet doesn't.
Mary, can I finish? Can I finish a little bit my sentence here? The problem is like why this is the correctness of the overview of Kubernetes. The problem is there's no any way for us to indicate the scheduler or any controller. Those resources is properly reclaimed. So, like for example, when the eviction manager try to evict some things based on disk starvation. So if we don't wait for those kind of cleanup, then like Docker image remove, like the particularly this of the PR, or it is walnut is being reclaimed, and you may end up to make that disk starvation issue, scheduler or controller, even worse. So that's kind of things we try to make this correctness. I agree. If there's the other state to indicate a pod, like pod is in the deleting state, and then we just do the background of the cleanup, that would be wonderful. But the problem is in today's API, we don't have that way to indicate this is pod in the deleting state. We are doing the resource reclaims. So scheduler only look at those kind of things, and all the controller look at those kind of things. They think about they are not based on the usage to take action. They are based on the request, which is misleading. That's kind of things we try to address here.
Maybe, Merrick, could I make I think I would agree.
I think that's kind of like, as I said, like the test is not measuring the time to delete a pod from the time when deletion is started to deletion is ended. It tests if the API call, so like the time when something sends something to API server to the time it got a response. So yes. It's like the kubelet, the time, how much time kubelet uses to clean up resources is not accounted there.
So can I wanted to like inject a hypothetical. So what we're doing is, what is happening is we're executing X thousand of delete requests at the same time across the cluster. When that happens, the API server has a high enough rate limiting threshold that it allows them all in. Mm-hmm. And then it goes down to etcd. etcd lets them all in, and then etcd contends on disk. That's effectively what's happening here. We're basically trying to put too many things in too short of an interval. Generally, we would jitter and smooth this out, and the SLO is intended to say the system as a whole should never send an excess number of contending requests to anything. That's what we're measuring, right? And it's a reasonable thing. Like we smear things, we smooth things. If we had a test that every single time we do a particular operation, we're executing all of those in the same instant, we would always fail the SLO. And so we would smear it. The fix here is smearing. The question is that going to be enough to fix it so that we could ship? And can we do that safely? Maybe what we really need to do is go assess what the correct fix is, and then come back to this group by 1 p.m. Maybe.
I can't come back at 1 p.m. because like I'm not in the.
Yeah.
Well, so I think the main question is what users, what percentage of users are affected by this scenario, and do those users, is there a significant difference for those users waiting for a 181 that resolves this and releasing a 180 with a known issue that is consumable and usable by the rest of the user community in the meantime?
Yeah, the thing is you're making a precedence. Like we've
shipped issues before though, right? I mean,
no, not like that.
Yeah, we have. We shipped plenty of issues.
Issues, yes, but like we haven't violated SLOs.
Marek, if you add one test, update your test to add some walnut, you will see even like the previous release, you will see that even worse. I asked when I first realized we add that one, instead change API and add the walnut deletion. So that's the couple minutes delay. You just even to test that. My point is, if you test that one, your simple test for this deletion API, and your pod have the volume, and that will be even more. And that's the previous release, even worse.
But that's not measuring.
So let's
We're not measuring that.
But it doesn't matter. So measuring the wrong thing is worse than measuring the wrong thing and making the wrong decision is worse than not measuring anything at all in some cases. But I think, Merrick, to your point, I think the best thing for us to do would be to identify that if there's an easy fix here that is a correctness fix and use the SLO. So let's spend the next 2 hours just doing a quick pass on the fact that we're hammering the API server all at once and look if we can smear that from each node. And I bet you that'll fix it just as well as a revert would. Would that be acceptable?
Well, sure. Like if it works, it works. Like the thing is, I don't know who is the right decision makers for allowing sleeping SLOs. I think it's a bigger decision than just a release team. Like this is bigger.
So it would be SIG scale and SIG node, and then if we can't agree, it would be probably SIG testing. And so,
probably architect, yeah, I don't SIG testing.
Can we make the release team as the final decision maker here?
I don't think so. I think it's bigger. I think it's like architecture SIG or whatever. Like this is like what some of us are proposing is to just ignore one of our SLOs.
Okay, we can look up the architect.
Yeah.
Okay, so
let's bring in a couple more people. But in the next 2 hours, I'd like to see the people who have the experience on this to take a quick look at do the smearing and again, agreed the goal will be not slipping. SIG release owns releasing. SIG testing owns testing. SIG scale owns the SLOs. If we have to appeal to a third body as well, it's good to have architectural input. SIG architecture does not own this. It is evolved onto those teams. And so all that we're going to do is come back and say, we're getting more people involved to weigh a trade-off. That diminishes the value of this group of people being able to make the correct decision.
I agree.
I agree with your point, Merrick. I do not agree as a bootstrap steering committee hat on that it is a good precedent for us to say the people on testing, scale, and node can't make the right decision.
Well, but the thing is we need the escalation point, right?
Yeah, which today is to the steering committee. And SIG architecture,
okay, fine. Steering committee is fine. Like some escalation point, someone who can actually overload whatever.
Yeah. So this is a great test point. Why don't we send the email to SIG Arch and the steering committee on this topic to get both in the same one and say, while we're also looking at the other aspects. I agree, crossing a threshold of taking away an SLO objective is good. SIG testing takes away tests all the time to make release decisions, and it's not a problem. And that's a measure of the correctness of the product, and they do that by trading off with the SIG. So I don't want SLOs to be something more magical than any of the test suites that are owned by the teams.
Yes, yeah, but we are tests are currently passing, this is violated. So if other tests will be failing, that's the same issue.
Yeah, we've always cut releases with tests failing, and again, I have to point out that the scalability test has never been passing.
Yes, even last release, we have the couple issue. We talked to the scalability because it's last minutes.
Look, I'm sorry, that's not a productive line of discussion for me to start.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's not.
Hang on. The point I want to make is that taking 2 hours to find a fix and regrouping sounds cool, but I worry that means we won't effectively have enough time to actually get testing signal on whatever change we make. And I would propose that we delay it.
Okay. I'd like to reinforce that point. Mehdi and I were chatting offline, and I want to revise the guidance I gave earlier that we'd be happy to take a change to the code base today and roll it out as a release later on. We'd actually want to, if we're going to take any change to the code today, we'd want to release it tomorrow, not today. So that would involve a slip.
So the thing that I feel, just this is some part gut, part just data here, is that the test itself feels in some ways like a regression. And we don't have any valid runs of that testing suite to work from. So ergo, it is not a valid test point to begin with.
Well, the test prior to August 25th, these latencies were within acceptable ranges as defined by the test.
But this is the thing, is that if the test itself is predicated on a non-valid base state, which based on everything this discussion has uncovered is true, then the test is testing a regressive state in itself.
No,
well, I don't think I agree with this, because like the test grid itself was red, but we know one of the runs was actually, the test itself actually passed. For example, run 23 that I was pointing to, which I was using as a base for my bisection, it actually passed and all the latencies were healthy. The red itself was due to a different reason. That was because we are having some artificial checks on the resource usage of some GLBC controller.
I think we're all kind of jumping around. Like we have there's like a bunch of different points and there's no absolute. Like literally there is no absolute in this project. It is how all the SIGs work together to find the right balance of decisions, which is delaying releases may not be a huge impactor to some people, and we weigh that against not violating the goals that we set for ourselves. Tests should be correct, but when they're not, we still treat those as a signal. I think it'd be fair to say in reaction to that is we shouldn't, because this test was failing, that's something that next release we want to correct and make sure that that doesn't happen again. But it doesn't invalidate that we do have more signal now saying, it's kind of like, this is a rough one, right? Because like, I agree with Merrick, I agree with Jordan, I agree with Dawn, I agree with Shyam. Like we're trying to find that middle ground. If we delay to tomorrow, what's the impact to the community? Basically we're saying, do we revert or do we try to find the correct fix based on limited info? And
so here's the thing: if we institute a change to actually fix this and do the smearing, that, in my opinion, is a significant enough architectural change that is going to warrant 3 runs of all of the test suites, which means literally days of delay. This is not a 24-hour delay we're talking about. We're talking about a significant architectural change.
At least, yeah. So Clayton, actually, I heard there's 3 options only, right? So one option just point out, I also totally agree with him. And another option is I'm totally okay also revoke the original PR, because that problem, that issue, that incorrectness was being there for many releases. We can have come back to say, oh, this is still the problem we didn't fix. And then let's come back to the 1.9. Then we start talk about the large architecture change, and that I'm also okay. Third option is just ship as it is and document as the known issues. And I also agree, because I personally what I mentioned earlier, like the warning deletion, that kind of things. Actually, I almost call pause that release. That is way more impact on the SLO, and it's just we didn't measure that time. And so I almost call off, and I talked to everyone, Brian, Eric Tong, and all the engineer involved with that PR was let that slip in. And at the end, we think about, okay, that's the correction, and there's no easy way to fix at the API level, and there's no easy way to let the Kubernetes bypass the API change and fix that problem. But in reality, are we going to shoot that problem? Actually, I never heard, this is more than 2 releases ago, I never heard any production issue report back to me. This is caused the problem. So I'm kind of okay with the later 2 choice again, but the first choice, we already go through that one for the warning deletion, and there's no easy way to fix that one.
The worry about the revert would be that we have been testing with the new behavior. And so if we say that it's an architectural issue to smear, I don't know why this revert, having months of soak time on it, having months of soak time with it in, isn't going to cause another issue. Like, it's probably not going to cause an issue, but I don't think it's any more than the smearing in terms of the revalidation.
That's actually a good point. Like the big issue is that this means that we need to have post-submit tests for performance. Like, there's no other way. Like, the reason why we are here is exactly because we disabled post-submit.
And Clayton, just to be clear, this change went in 3 weeks ago. So,
yeah, so we would have 3 weeks to have the discussion fixed if we had the Like, and of course, like we would cut the previous regression also instantly because like that's how the submits.
So is there agreement or disagreement that reverting this invalidates the other signals that we have on the
Yes, I think I agree with that. But this, yeah.
I don't know. I think it's contained enough, and the state that it was blocking on is contained to the kubelet and is not surfaced via the API. I think the targeted removal of blocking on GC, if the performance tests were run, I think the other correctness tests the results could stand. But
hey, Marek, I have a question. What I want to understand. What do you suggest at this point? What option?
Like I suggest reverting. I suggested reverting. Like if it's like a bigger change, like I don't know what the change exactly does. So like I can't say if it's safe to revert it or not. Like if it's not completely safe to revert, so then like we need to ship with the performance regression because like we don't have time to just properly test it. And then fix it in 1A, like in 0.1 release. But like if we can revert it, I think we should revert it and then possibly reapply this together with fixes in 0.1 release.
The full revert is more dangerous because that the original PR had the blocking on GC, which is what caused the performance issue, and paying attention to an eviction signal in the API object. And so fully reverting it starts to get into the kubelet responding to API changes, and that would invalidate more testing.
Okay. Well, if there is a way to disable it, like.
Can we introduce whatever flag? I hate that. So by default it's on. So we do keep the current behavior in the production. But for the testing, for the scale test, we disable that one. So we can have the good test result, say we don't violate. Under certain condition, we are not violate that SLO. Is that okay? So then we can find all the other problem, and at the same time think about this is the root cause and other performance impact issue on the deleting path. It is being fixed. Because right now my understanding it is without this kind of things and we never got a good signal, we even don't know other fix is really fix the problem.
But then we need to actually test the system with the flag off, and that again is the same as reverting because we are suggesting to our users in some cases that you can disable the flag, and we didn't test the system with the flag disabled. So then we need to test that, and then that's at least a couple of days. We need to wait for the test to pass. So I think the flag is the same as reversing and disabling it because we need to test the system in that state anyway.
Yeah, and in general, we're trying to keep our scalability tests close to production, as close as possible to production, because that's the whole point. We want to test production-like setups on scalability tests. So if we artificially actually introduce a flag and just turn it off for the purpose of scalability, eventually I see a stage where more and more features are added.
Correctness is not tuning. We shouldn't tune correctness.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, but like the thing is, we had the same problem for forever, right? For at least one release or two releases.
I'm not sure what you're referring to, but okay.
Like basically, this is fixing something that was an issue for a long time, which means everyone can live with it.
So Mark, I think, are you okay? So it seems that the reversing is not an easy thing to do. I think, are you okay with just adding to the non-issues and release as it is?
Okay is like a big word. Like I'm not okay with sleeping SLOs. Like those SLOs were discussed a number of times, and I will repeat because I'm not sure everyone understood. The SLO is not about how long it takes to delete a pod. The SLO is about how long it takes to it takes a API call. So like just the API.
Options, between your options, do you have any other options? So you had two options.
Yes, revert or not revert. Like I don't know how isolated the change is, so I can't answer this question.
Can we change the
If
test?
there is a way to revert it, I would prefer to revert it. And then in 1.8, reintroduce it together with fix.
Okay, so can we, so based on what you want to see, what you measured, then can we change the test to?
But like how?
Yeah, I don't know, because the Kubernetes doing we take action. We already take action.
It's not about Kubernetes. Like it's about like
actually. Yeah, I have a point to say here. So this is not actually about our tests. If this release gets rolled out and if this goes to production, and if there is someone somewhere running a 2000 node cluster and he deletes a 3000 pod replica set at an interval of 2 minutes, he's going to face this issue. This has nothing to do with tests. And there'll be a SLO violation for whoever is doing that. And if so this is actually a real production issue. I'm not sure how many.
No one is proposing that we say that this isn't an issue. I think that we're saying this is a known issue under these circumstances, and we resolve it as quickly as possible.
But I also want to ask you, also, what kind of the real production issue you think about the end user or admin or operator will face? I know there's based on current defined SLO, it is the regression. But can you give me the real reason you think about, and the end user will say, oh my God, I delete my pod, it takes such a long time. I'm going to file product support ticket to Google, to OpenShift. Can you give me a thing?
It's not about deleting time to delete pods. It's about the API latency of delete call.
Right. So
about how long it takes for API server to process the call on API server side. It's not about Kubernetes at all.
Well, so actually, it's not. It's etcd. It's how fast can a disk fsync. So
yeah, etcd. That's like API server. I mean, like master machine.
Yeah, we're basically measuring how many I/O operations can you do a second if you do them all at once. And that, I think, like the smearing is probably the right thing here. If the revert is structured enough, we're balancing that. I think that you guys are taking the hard line, which is totally acceptable, which is it is wrong to ship something that we know could break someone. And I think the release team's just trying to balance that's the way the world works. And that's kind of a fundamental, like, what is Kube? Do we delay releases or not? Some of which is owned by SIG release. And some of that is like, if we disagree, we need to bump up a level.
So and I think the inputs to that question have to be how many people, like what percentage of people, and broken to what degree, and like those have to be inputs. It can't be absolutes, right? If one person is broken in a minor way, are we going to block a release on that? No.
That's why we have non issues on each release, and any release has that.
Well, that's also why you have SLOs.
Non issues, but yeah, every release have that.
So what is the impact though? If obviously this fix that went in that we're talking about reverting was there for a reason, and the question is, does the reach or impact of the change that we're talking about reverting actually affect more people and more use cases than the cases around the SLO? And that's, I mean,
I think the question is if it will set, like, I agree that this fixes some things. The question, like, I am not sure if, like, the people are currently living with the same problem for, like, number of releases. So it's not something that's magically broke. It's something that was always broken.
Marek, I could give you more than 30 production issue cause the disk eviction manager too aggressive to evict, kill some container running application. But I have the 0 and the things caused by the volume deletion, delay of the deletion of the pod. 0 support cases. And we are deal with this kind of disk eviction manager too aggressive kill of the pod. And because we are not really clean those dead container, And
that's a good point, Dawn, because that issue occurs even if you just have one node. If you have one node and you fill it up with pods, and then you kill all the pods, and the node reports that it's done and free and available for more work, and then you schedule a bunch more pods, you're going to crush the node. So that can affect a single node cluster.
On the other hand, like if you have a thundering herd, then you may end up like some nodes might fail to report healthy, and the pods might like just get evicted because of that. Like.
So the correctness tests at scale were passing, and we didn't see increased latency for other API requests, and node status requests did not have high latency either. Like the scalability tests showed that this was limited to the delete pod call. I think it's as well scoped as it could possibly be.
Yep.
So I recommend the following, and I'd like to resolve this because we're actually running out of time for the commitments we made, is that we move forward with the release branch as it currently exists and do not try and selectively revert the code around this. We organize a SIG-driven effort, no matter what we need to do to organize that, to get a true correct answer to this and make a huge push to get this in 1.8.1. Because frankly speaking, from the Microsoft Azure perspective, where we have thousands of people running clusters, there's very low adoption on a .0 release in production anyway. So we should provide a 1.8.1 release that has a fully fleshed out answer to this problem, that is tested, that it meets the SLOs in whatever way possible, that it's provided with the confidence of multiple SIGs coordinating around a known issue, and that we do everything we can in our responsible power to radiate the information to our user community that this is a known issue, this is exactly how it manifests, and that we do not, as a community, condone violating SLOs by proxy, but we do have an issue right now where the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, to quote Spock. So I think that we have an issue here that we need to resolve in the best way possible. It is not the good, or there is no right way.
Well, I can't do anything to change your mind, I guess. But like, I also would like to seek release to escalate the lack of post-submit block.
Yeah, I think that's actually very fair. Like, I think and Merrick, I'd actually prefer that you record that you. Like, the best way to do this is if you can write the quick write-up of why you think violating the SLO is, like a quick summary of this, and then make sure we make that in the release and spread out, because like this is the balance between the SIGs is something that we have to keep getting better and better at, and then having the hard principles and making sure that we go through this discussion is actually critically important. It's as important part of the release as the actual release itself.
Yeah, well, I can't do it today. Like, I am already in home for like 3 hours. Well, I should be at home for 3 hours, and I'm not, so I won't do this today.
You don't have to do it today.
I can do that. Like, I can probably write a short write-up on this, but who do we escalate this to?
So send it out to the 3 SIGs, and then we'll copy in the steering committee SIG and the and SIG architecture, and then we'll have a good old discussion on it.
Okay. Sounds good.
So this is not going to block the release, or this is a release blocker, this process?
I think that is yet to be resolved. It sounds like we're going to proceed with release mechanics as is, waiting for the final decision. And that's what will be resolved by the SIGs and steering and architecture, right?
I'm very concerned that we don't have a consensus model that's going to provide an answer. That's part of the forming part of the steering committee process that has not been fully formed.
Yeah, the thing is also like we don't have any official like deadlines. Like for like number of like systems, like if you have defined SLO, violating SLO is basically a red line. Like we just can't process here.
I really think about this is a final decision. It is the release team's decision. If every single technical decision is going to escalate to the steering committee, then I shouldn't quit, withdraw my nomination, honestly, in the future. Because I think my part of the statement. I saw the steering committee is not for the architecture decision or the release decision.
So I can guess here what's going to happen is that SIG release owns releasing. And the charter of SIG release is going to end up saying things like SIG release owns the decision of making a release.
Yes.
And SIGs provide to SIG release their requirements for releasing. And the discussion about accepting or rejecting those is where the steering committee / architecture would weigh in. We don't have a red line in Cube. Pulling a red line out like the last day of a 1.8 release is a good exercise. It's probably not going to make the 1.8 release better or worse practically. Like, we need to have the discussion. I'm a little worried about SIG release not being the ones who own this decision, right or wrong.
Okay.
Well, that's fair, but like currently we just need a clear policies around like where is the red line? They need to become red line somewhere.
I agree with that, but what I'm saying is we should not change this process so we should discuss that changing that process, but till now SIG release decided on the release, and I think for this release it should be still SIG release until we decided that we wanted another way. So I think if SIG release are comfortable with releasing 1.8 at the state that it is, it should go that way. And then if we want to change the process, we should discuss that. And for the later releases, we can apply a new process. But we should not change the process one day before the release.
Especially I think Merrick, to your point, you're trying to convince people that it is very, very bad to cross red lines, but we haven't really established those red lines yet. We should establish red lines, and I actually think that would be very useful. I think my worry is the normal release mindset is SIG release owning the decision to trade off things that aren't red lines for other things that aren't red lines. That decision basically comes down to more of a what is the best for our users, et cetera.
Yeah, and I would say that I feel very confident that every step in the way where we've had to make a decision where it involved a point A and a point B, even in cases where there was no point B to argue, there was nobody to argue that point, I would actually specifically play the devil's advocate in those roles just to get the decision made. So I feel like our highest duty is to provide a balanced view of what is the impact to the user community, what is the impact to the governance model around this project, so we're not just doing things willy-nilly. So I feel absolutely confident that you could review every decision we made thus far and it was always in the interest balanced for the community. So I feel confident that that's the case. And I feel in this case that that's in alignment with that as well. But with a big red asterisk that this needs to be solved as soon as humanly possible. This is a critical project level concern that we need to resolve. But the battle line cannot be the release going out today, in my opinion.
I agree, yeah.
I agree strongly with that. I somehow thought we had drawn that battle line at cutting the alphas and the betas, but nobody seemed to pay attention then. So I would encourage SIGs who own tests to make sure the tests are passing, and we adhere to that strongly going forward.
Yeah, the thing that I'm mostly worried is is basically a precedent. Like having a precedent is bad always, right?
I so agree, 100%.
And I think to Jace's point, which I agree with fully, is that we're operating in a space without definition. And the challenge is to get that definition. So the precedents we set here there's no opportunity to set precedent other in this particular decision.
Yeah. So I think that the responsible thing to do is to be as open and transparent with our community about what we're delivering to them. And I believe that there is effort already in place and to do that. I think that if we speak with the media or we have users that we can connect with or whatever we need to do due diligence around that, I think then we need to do that.
Oh, FYI, I also saw in media that we already released 1.8 Kubernetes 1.8. That's what media says.
Our PR people always do better job.
Yeah. And that one went out with the regression in it already. So we've already released with the regression. So what are we even arguing about?
So people are ready already then.
Okay. So it's possible we kind of the SIG scale document what expectation on the deletion SLO, and then we come back to how we are to measure those kind of things, and then of course we document this is known issue first,
Yep.
and then we come back to how we resolve this kind of things. The result have many possibilities, like measurement, how you measure those kind of things. For me, looks like right now there's no way for us to like the how to measure those kind of things, right? There could be require of some API change, could be not API change, or maybe it's just, I know people already say no. And they could be like just kind of, there are certain things we indicate and to make this more accurate measure on the deletion SLO. So there are a lot of things we could do. So we can take time to look at those kind of things, but the current actually, the change is the correctness the change. And based on the one deletion data, I don't think about this is cause any trouble for end user. But without this change, we already have tons of the production issues. So based on this resolve the real production issue, I think we should leave as it is. Is that okay?
I think that is a reluctant answer that we're sort of leaning toward. That we're making a bargain here in some ways, and the offside of the bargain is that we're violating something that has a foundation and real impact in large clusters that we're going to have to deal with. And the other side of that is that we do have documented known use cases that are being fixed by the thing that is being left in as a regression. So we have two duties after this. One is to radiate the information that impacts users, and two is to find the correct balance between the spirit of the SLO. Let's just ignore the implementation of the SLO. The SLO is founded in a very strong and important spirit of what should or should not be true at scale.
I don't even think we have to ignore the measurement. We have to change the behavior to maintain correctness and fix the thundering herd and get back within the current SLO test.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And also, to Don's point, provide the metrics necessary to make sure that we're validating the right things too.
We are validating the correct thing. We are basically measuring it only on the API server side from the time when API server receives the API call to the time it responds. It's not impacted by the client, kubelet, anything. It's isolated to the master machine.
America, I understand, but before used to be deletion is done by the master long time ago. So we move to the kubelet to make the decision to deletion. That's
yes, but we don't take it into account.
I understand what you measure. The problem is right now we lack of the proper communication to the master, and that's the some API change. Or could be some other change to give you that indicator. So that's kind of problem we try to resolve.
We have this.
All right, let's.
But we do have this.
Yes.
So we are committing to documenting the known issue for 180.
Correct.
We are committing to fixing the thundering herd issue so we can maintain correctness and get back within our SLO, and pushing for that to happen in 181 as soon as possible.
Yes.
And like the post-mortem kind of thingy, making sure we actually block on, like, we resolve performance regressions, like, not like in one late release, right? Like,
so Marek,
I'll be up here.
Marek, definitely please write your thoughts in the retro doc. I'm going to put a link in chat, and I would love for you to write about this because we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
And
like, can you send me in on Slack, because like this chat will disappear.
Yeah.
I'll make sure you get it privately.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so what this means is that with the data that we have to work from right now, we're going to proceed with the 1.8 branch as it is with the testing that's already happened, which actually makes me feel better because there's been less changes on that branch. So that's actually another way in which we're improving quality potentially. So
the trigger would be the known issue added to the release note, right?
Which needs to be done instead.
Start the process of the release.
Yeah, Jace, if you could formally announce that the release notes are final in the Slack channel, then that will be our trigger.
So what we need, though, is somebody to volunteer to actually write the technical write-up on this to give to Jennifer, or put it in that issue, the known issues issue, ideally first, so that we can get that in there as soon as possible. So can somebody step forward and write the first draft of that? Don't nobody jump for it.
I'm happy to write something. Where are we going to collaborate on that?
The issue, the 1.8 known issues.
Okay.
I'll put a link in chat. This issue.
So just fleshing out the cause and circumstances and impact of this.
Yes.
Okay.
User facing. What do you do? How do you know this is going to hit you? What's a use case?
Yep.
Okay. I want to tell everybody that this is the best of the community right here. This argument, this disagreement, working through this is exactly why this community is so good. I hope that everybody contributes to the retro to let us know how we can make this situation better in the future.
Thanks. And also, sorry for the WhatsApp folks. It's too late.
It's okay. All right. Release team, please stay on for just a moment longer. Core release team. But everybody else, feel free to drop. All right. So, Adam, we're back on the playbook, the schedule playbook that you had written up. So I'll work with Jennifer to make sure she knows once that issue is in the known issue to put that in the documentation. I'll give you the high sign that it's actually final, and we'll go from there. Is there anything else that we need to be keeping track of? Any things in flight that are going to impact this that we need to know about?
I'm not aware of anything.
Eric?
Nothing from that.
Aaron?
Could you repeat the question? Sorry, I was looking at something else.
Just final thoughts. Anything else we need to watch?
No.
Okay. Wow.
That was epic.
Yes. And so important. I'm really glad Merrick came on because, frankly, we were a little bit too homogenous in our thought before that. Okay. I think that's it. We'll touch base again, just like we did yesterday in a couple hours in the SIG release channel, just to make sure everything's on track. Assume we are until you hear otherwise. And thank you, everyone, for this.
Yeah, just one question, Jace. Anything
Yes.
specific with the public messaging, this medium, and so on?
What was the question?
Anything specific that we should highlight while speaking to media, like some public sources?
In regards to the regression in there?
In regards of anything that's happening with the release. They don't care about regression itself, but they care about the release. So.
Well, I think that I think we're fine to just message that we're doing the release at 6 p.m. Pacific. That we resolved the thing that we were blocking for yesterday, which was the Docker issue, and that we have had a discussion as a community around a known issue, and we've decided that it is in the best interest of the community to release as is and to note the issue.
Okay. So we are still on track with the
Yes,
great.
everything is on track, and in fact, in some ways, we're better off than if we had tried to put a fix in.
Okay. Yep, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet. All right, everybody. This is it. I'll see you in the channel.
Yep. Bye, guys.
Bye.